Hey, what's going on everybody? In this video I'm going to go over how to enable security settings on the Unifi Security Gateway, but this also applies to the Dream Machine as well as the Dream Machine Pro. Now there are a few features that are supported on one platform that are not on the other, and I will go through those as I go through this video. Now I am going to be following a guide straight from Unifi, so if you'd like to follow along with me, just open up your web browser and type in Unifi Security Settings, and it should be the first link here, Unifi USG UDM Configuring Internet Security Settings. So this is the guide that I'm going to be referencing for the majority of this video. Now there are some things in the guide that I'm not going to touch on, and there's some things I'm going to talk about that aren't really in this guide, but this video is really just to be a kind of quick get off the ground, enable security features on your device, as well as understanding kind of what these features do. Now, without rambling on too much, let's just go ahead and get into the configuration here. So I'm going to go ahead and launch my Unifi controller. Now, I am assuming that you have already set up whichever device you're using, be it a security gateway or a Dream Machine, and that you already have it adopted to the controller. So I'm going to go ahead and enter my controller information here that we did in the first time setup video. And I'm going to go to the settings menu. Now, there's two different ways to enable these settings. There is the new menu or the classic settings, and I'm going to show you both, but this is probably the menu that you're a little more familiar with if you've worked with Unifi devices before, and this is more of the beta menu, more streamlined area, I guess, if you want to describe it like that. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to enable threat management. Now this is probably the main feature that you're going to want turned on if you're buying the security gateway or Dream Machine. And that is under the security tab here in the new settings menu and internet threat management. And we can turn that on with a single slider here, internet threat management. Now you will notice that we do have a little cautionary warning here, and that's enabling IDS IPS will disable hardware offload. And it'll also affect the maximum device throughput. So it gives you a maximum throughput for each device. So right now I'm using a regular Unifi Security Gateway, so I will be limited to 85 megabits per second just from enabling internet threat management. And if I had the Gateway Pro, 250 meg, Dream Machine 850 meg, and the Dream Machine Pro has a throughput of 3.5 gigabits with this turned on. Now these are just accounting for IDS and IPS, not even any other features that we may or may not enable later. So these are kind of the maximums that you'll see by enabling this. So just by doing that, I have limited myself to 85 megabits throughput. Now the second setting that we're going to want to set is, do we want intrusion detection or intrusion prevention? So detection is just going to log an alert. If it detects anything, it's not really going to actively block it. It's just going to let you know that something happened. Now internet prevention is going to actively block those connections if it notices anything malicious. So we're going to turn on prevention. And below that we get to set a sensitivity level. Now this level is just kind of a cool looking slider to enable or disable these individual features. So if you go with number 1, it's going to give you the best performance. It's only going to enable 5 out of those 11 features, and the more you go up the slider, the more features it is going to enable. Now I'm going to go ahead and just go with maximum protection, because why not? I'm already limited to 85 megabits anyway, so let's just protect against everything. And if you really want to get into what all this is going to be protecting you against, that's all down here, and you can enable or disable any of these features that you want, really. And that's pretty much all there is to enabling threat management. Now in the old style menu, which you might be a little bit more used to, there is a threat management tab, and it gives you pretty much all of the same settings. And it looks like we didn't hit apply on that other menu, so it's telling me that it's turned off. So first we need to select IPS, same way as in the other menu. And we get all of the features that were shown in the last menu, except we don't have that slider. So really the main difference between these two menus is whether or not you have that slider 1 through 5 on the beta menu, or enabling each one by one in the classic menu. And you can see that it says only a restricted set of categories can be enabled on the USG 3P. Now I'm not exactly sure if it's not showing all of the options, or if we can just turn them all on but they're not all necessarily working. I'm not entirely sure on that one, but I do know that the Dream Machine technically supports more categories than the security gateway. So we're not going to be getting the full threat management out of a security gateway. We need a Dream Machine for that. Now I'm going to go ahead and click Apply Changes, and I'm just going to go back to the New Settings menu and make sure everything looks good over here as well. And yeah, it looks like we're on the highest setting, number 5, 11 out of 11. Alright, now the next thing we're going to enable is GEO IP Filtering. Now, a big note on this one regarding the Security Gateway versus Dream Machine, you can only have threat management or GEO IP filtering enabled on a security gateway. You can't have them both at the same time. Only on a Dream Machine can you have GEO IP filtering with threat management. And the reason for that is on a security gateway, enabling GEO IP filtering can only be done if hardware offload is enabled. So you cannot enable it while hardware offload is disabled, and as we just saw, threat management requires that hardware offloading be disabled for that to work. So it's one or the other on a security gateway, however you can use both if you're running a Dream Machine. And we're going to go to the classic menu to enable this, and there should be, I think it's under Routing and Firewall. Yep, there is a tab at the top here for GEO IP filtering, and it says that it is beta. Now here, it's pretty straightforward. All you got to do is select what countries you want to block or allow. So we have an action that we can take, and it's either block or allow. So really we're making a blacklist or a whitelist dependent on countries. And we can also determine the direction that we want to block or allow, and that's incoming, outgoing, or both. So typically you're going to make a blacklist in both directions. So we're going to do block and both. And then now you might be wondering which countries kind of to choose to either block or allow. My kind of general rule is just to Google the top 10 worst countries, and there is actually a list of that. So if we just go to Google and type in Spamhaus top 10 worst countries, the number 1 result should be the top 10 worst countries, and this is in terms of spam. And you can read the description and all that if you want to, but basically these are the countries that have the worst reports of spam, so we're going to block what's on this list. Now obviously if you live in one of these countries, you're not going to want to block your own country, or else you're probably going to make your internet not work at all. So I live in the USA, so obviously I'm not going to block the number 2 on this list, which is the country I live in. So I'm just going to go ahead and break this out into its own tab here, and go ahead and plug all of these in one by one. So I'm just going to go through the first one. I'll get rid of those that are already in there, and then I'll skip ahead. So first one is China, so we'll go ahead and just put that in here. And all you do is just scroll down the list, select China, and that's it. And then you go for your next one. So I'm going to go ahead and put all of these in. All right, now we have all of our top 10 countries besides number 2 in this list. Now I am going to add one more. This is just kind of a personal preference. Brazil. Nothing against Brazil, but I have seen them on many spam list, and as far as I'm aware, there's not any functionality, at least that it impacts with me. So I like to put that on my list. Really, it's just up to you. Now, a little bit of a note on this feature. This probably sounds awesome, like, oh, we're going to block all of these different connections from all these, countries that may or may not be legit. I don't live in that country, so why would I care? Well, there are a lot of services and a lot of websites that you may use every day that you don't realize are actually hosted in different countries. And this can cause quite a lot of problems with that. So just a few that I know of. If you block Ireland, I know for sure that some Facebook services are affected because Facebook hosts a lot of their stuff out of Ireland. Germany, which is actually on our list here, I know has some issues with TeamViewer. A lot of the TeamViewer servers are hosted out of Germany, and that can have an effect here. Some other ones like Microsoft in the Netherlands, Castrol Oil Company in Canada, just stuff like that. This is probably going to be the first place you're going to look if there is a website that you feel like should be working and it's not working quite properly. And kind of going along with that, while this may seem like an awesome feature, it is pretty easy to get around because this really just goes off of a list of IP blocks that are associated with certain countries. But if a certain country really wants to get around something like this, all they got to do is host a service on an IP block that is not in that country. So somebody from China could technically own a server over here in the United States with a United States IP. That's not going to be blocked. This service does not differentiate between who owns what server or service. It only looks at IP blocks and whether or not they are designated for a certain country or not. So take this feature with a grain of salt. we're going to go ahead and apply those changes. And since I am on a security gateway, this really isn't going to do anything because hardware offloading is disabled. So we're just going to move on to, let's see, I think the next on our list is DNS filtering. And yep, here we go down. I'm just looking at my list here. DNS filtering is actually only available on the Dream machine, so I'm not going to be able to show you how to set that up. But if you do want to set that up, just go to the new settings, Internet Security, and DNS filters, and you can add in filters for really any domain that you want. Think of it as just kind of blocking domains. Now, a little note with this one is that if you have clients that are using a VPN or secure DNS, it's not going to get filtered by DNS filtering because because that traffic will be encrypted. So this is not going to be able to filter encrypted DNS traffic. It's just a note. I wish I was able to show you how to set that up, but I don't have a Dream machine yet, so I cannot. So we'll go ahead and move on to Deep Packet Inspection, which should be the next one in the list down here. And we can also see there's a note for Unifi Security Gateway, which is that only whole category selections are supported, but the restriction is not applicable to a Dream machine. And I'll show you what that's talking about as we get into it here. So I'm going to go back to the new menu for this, and it's under Security and Traffic and Device Identification. And it is enabled by default, so we already have Enable Deep Packet Inspection checked up here. But we need to create a restriction group. I'll go ahead and make that bigger. And we're going to have to assign that group to networks. So while this is technically enabled, it's not really doing anything. It's just classifying the data and doing that deep packet inspection. But it doesn't know what to do with that information yet, so we got to tell it what to do. So let's go ahead and click Add Restriction Group. We're just going to name it Toasties Restrictions. Add that restriction, and now you can see we have that under the default group. And we can either edit, remove it, or add a restriction. And that's what we're going to do, add a restriction. And we'll just start with peer-to-peer as the category. And for the application, you can see we can either select all applications or we can select individual peer-to-peer applications. Now, I am on a security gateway and it does let me just select individual applications. However, in the guide it says that that's actually not supported and that I will have to do the entire category. So that's what it means, is that you can only block the entire category. You can't really get granular with it on the security gateway. However, it does let you put that in, and I haven't actually tested it to see if it will work with only single websites. So I guess that's something we can test right now. But in order for this restriction to work, we're going to have to tell it what we want to do, and that's block traffic. And if you want it to log everything it blocks, then we can enable this as well. And this is the most important one. I really don't even know why it's here. Actually, I do. It's so you can shut off certain restrictions and without completely removing them, but you do need to enable the restriction if you want it to do anything. And once we've done this, we can just add that restriction. And now you can see that we can expand Toasties restrictions and see that we have one category. This rule is enabled and this rule will block. Doesn't tell us any of the details about it, but if you want to see the details, you just click on Edit, and it says that we have peer-to-peer. Alright, so now that we've made this restriction group, we need to assign it to a network, and that is down here. We have network restrictions and Wi-Fi network restrictions. We have to assign it both to a wired network and wireless if we have both. Now, we haven't set up a wireless network, but we do have the regular default LAN, and if we just click on Assign Restrictions to Network, then we can drop down this menu, go to Toasties Restrictions, and assign that restriction. And I'm going to go ahead and do that for Toasty Wi-Fi, which was already created, but it's not actually active. And that is how you apply deep packet inspection and restrictions to your networks. Now, what we're going to do real quick, I'm just going to add another restriction up here under Toasties Restrictions. So add restriction, and we're going to do social networks here. And for social networks, you've got all these like Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all of that. I'm going to go ahead and block all of them and enable the blocking, the logging, and the restriction. Now, since I added that to Toasties restriction, I don't have to go ahead and put it on a network again because we've already assigned that whole group to our two networks. So just by adding a restriction applies it to those networks now. And we're going to go ahead and exit out of there, and I'm going to go ahead and test this restriction. So facebook.com, and we're able to get to it. Hooray! This is something that I actually have some issues with, and that's getting it to actually work. But I can see that we are provisioning still, so it's probably waiting on all of these settings and restriction groups to actually make it to our security gateway. So I'm just going to give this a minute. Okay, and we can see our security gateway is no longer provisioning, so it should have all those new settings that we just applied. So we're just going to go back into the settings menu here and make sure that our restrictions are still showing up. I just like to be sure. So now let's open up a new tab and try to go to Facebook. And we can see that now it is just spinning. Let's see what Twitter does. LinkedIn. Let's see if BitTorrent comes up even though we blocked peer-to-peer. So it looks like that we can get to bittorrent.com, but I bet if we tried to run torrents, they wouldn't actually work. Because technically the website doesn't use peer-to-peer protocols, just the client application does. But we can see we are not able to get to LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook. So our restriction group is working. Now the last thing I'm going to show you is the network scanner and Honeypot, and those are actually just under the threat management tab that we've already been to. And it's down here at the bottom here. You can see network scanners, and we got threat scanner and internal Honeypot. Now technically, let's consult this document here for threat scanner. I actually don't see the threat scanner in this document, but it does say that network scanners are only supported on the Dream machine. However, we do have that option here, so I'm not entirely sure if this is going to do anything or not, but it does let us check it. And really all it says is that it's going to auto scan clients on the network for potential security threats and vulnerabilities, and we'll see if that shows anything at all. Now the Honeypot, we can just check that here, and if we do check that, we have to create a Honeypot. So pick an IP that you want for your Honeypot IP, and I'll explain what this does in just a second. But I know that 192.168.1.2 is an IP that's out of our DHCP scope. It's not an IP of something that's in use, so I'm just going to use that IP and create that. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what a Honeypot does, it's actually just kind of like a spy device, I guess. you can kind of explain it like that. It's a fake IP on the network that's really just listening for attacks, and it's something that looks like a legitimate client device or something that can be taken advantage of, but it's really just there to detect port scans and stuff like that. So when you do get an infection on the network, typically what happens is the infection will try to do some reconnaissance, and that's by initiating scans on the other devices on your network. So what the Honeypot IP does is it just listens for these scans, and if we consult the document over here, it'll actually tell us which ones it listens for. So here is that list in case you are curious. Now to test that, all we got to do is try an SSH to that Honeypot IP, which I will do in just a minute, because we now have everything set up. So how do we really know that any of this is doing anything? Well, our DPI is obviously working because we can't get to any of the social networks. And if we go to our threat management tab, this is really where all of your detections and everything is going to show up. And this is also where we can see our little warning that says GEO IP filtering is not available because hardware offloading is disabled. So that is because I'm on a security gateway, and that's because I have threat management enabled. So can't have both. But if we had attacks, they would all kind of show up here. Now apparently one way to test this, apparently if we run this command, it should generate an alert. Now let's just see if that did anything at all. Oh, yep, there we go. So we can see we have one threat, and severity was high. It was in the United States, and the source was 8.8.8.8. So that's kind of just what you'll look like when you actually do have threats here. Now, see if I have PuTTY installed. I don't. Let's go ahead and get that real quick. And don't really worry about getting this unless you really want to test it yourself. PuTTY is just SSH and Telnet client program, and the only reason I'm doing this is to just test the Honeypot, see if it's actually going to show us an error or not. See if we have anything. Oh, here's the traffic log, which is just that DNS request that we did a couple minutes ago. And you can see we now have 2 threats. However, let's see, it's not really showing anything. It just says network Trojan detected, so that's 2 of the same thing. So going back to the document here, it does say that the alerts will appear in the Honeypot section of Threat Management Dashboard a few minutes after we've tested it. Alright, and actually after seconds of research, I'm pretty sure that the Honeypot is not going to show anything on a security gateway. There should be a tab up here where overview and traffic log is, that's called Honeypot, and that should show us our detections that the Honeypot made. However, I'm not seeing it in this controller, so I am just going to assume that that is another Dream Machine feature. So actually, I know that I picked the security gateway because there's a lot of overlap, but the more I work with it, the more I probably should have got a Dream Machine, because that is really what you want. You want a Dream Machine or a Dream Machine Pro if you're going to be doing any of this stuff, because the security gateways are a little bit outdated now. But anyways, that is a very basic explanation on how to set up security services, and it does technically apply to both, even though there are a few differences. Now, there are some other things that you can do to kind of configure more security, such as firewall rules. That's not something I'm going to get into in this video. I'm going to have a dedicated video for that, as well as port forwarding, which those aren't really security services. That's just basic firewall, so that's why I didn't include it in this video. But hopefully this kind of gets you off the ground and explains these features a little bit, as well as how to enable them. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments down below, and I try to answer most of them. And other than that, happy networking.